Jade Bryce, welcome to the Thought Room.
I'm so excited to be here. I'm excited to, I told you this before, but for your listeners, um, if I'm interviewing someone and I'm going to listen to an episode so that I can research them, I always, if there's an option, they've been on your show, yours is the one that I listen to because your depth of presence pulls out something different in the guest and the speaker than is what usually comes out in other episodes and other podcasts. So there's that, but then also listening when you interview, not only is it the depth of presence, but the posture of what you speak, maybe, or like you speak like a queen. You're really, really good at not only articulation, but you don't ever have this energy of like something I struggle with, which is like kind of rushing because there's so many points I want to hit within a certain amount of time. And also, I tend to get excited at times and I'll like accidentally interrupt. And what I've noticed about you is like, not only does your depth of presence change that, but this like posture of a queen of like the confidence that you're going to get to say what is meant to be said and everything that's meant to be a transmission in this 1 hour is going to come out. Mm-hmm. And so I've really, really learned a lot from just listening to your show. So I'm so excited to actually sit in your presence as you host me as a guest, because then I can actually really sit in your transmission field and absorb that as a fellow podcast host.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much for that compliment. I remember receiving that from you at the gathering that we were at, and I was blown away by your confidence and your openness. I actually shared that story with a close friend. I said, it felt so good to receive this compliment from a fellow podcaster who is a woman, and for her to stand unafraid, unashamed, and untamed, if you will, and compliment me in the presence of others and see my gifts. And especially because you are a podcaster, you get the nuance of the space and all that means. So it meant a great deal to me. And I got to practice receiving your compliment and being publicly celebrated. That felt really good. And that showed me so much about who you are and how much work that you've done on your feminine, healing your sister wound, all of that, healing your sexuality. And I'm sure we'll get into this today, but I had a little tidbit of, I don't know if you want to call it an upload or download or whatever, but that healing, a lot of healing the sister wound and being comfortable with women is about empowering your own sexuality. And this idea that there's nothing that this other woman can actually take from you, but there's energy to be shared and to be celebrated between you. And when we reach that place in our own healing, this whole other world opens up where we can really celebrate the beauty of other women without feeling threatened by it.
Yeah, so beautiful. And I love that you say that because 3-4 years ago, I was in front of Sophia Bush, who she's super intelligent, like so freaking smart. I can't think of the name of her podcast. I think she's had a couple, but I was in front of her talking to her, and I wouldn't have been able to give her that compliment because at the time, not only was I stuck in the comparison loop of like, what can I do to sound like her? Like, but also I never wanted to come across as like a fangirl to anyone, like whether someone was famous or not. I never wanted to come across as a fangirl because I didn't want them to feel like, well, if I compliment them, they'll think I'm less than, and then there won't be opportunity for like connection is what I used to think. Whereas like, that's actually a blockage to connection, you know? And I can say that the thing that has healed that was not so much the inner work, but the sisterhood that I've developed. And, you know, there had to be the inner work to bring that because the inner reality brings the external reality. And I had to call that in and be very, like, I guess, almost like command it to come forth. But the sisterhood that I've developed has been one of the most powerful tools in my healing because the love that's there and the medicine that they bring and the way that I have been able to open up to receive from them and to feel how healing that's been from other women is what's brought up the desire in me to give that to other women. You know what I mean? Because I hadn't felt it before to feel how good it feels.
Yes.
Once you feel how good it feels, then it's like, I want to give this to others, And I hadn't had that until the sisterhood that I've developed now. So it's been extremely healing.
It's life-changing.
Yeah.
It's life-changing. I'd love to start off by giving people a little bit of context for your amazingness and your journey and all the things that you do. You're a podcaster. You've hosted multiple podcasts, but now you've broken off to do your own podcast. I'd love for you to talk about that. And then just a tidbit about your journey or your walk to this path of being a leader, of being a speaker. I know you did some modeling, you had public life, you were doing something with were you a fight girl or something?
Yeah,
like
I was
that?
a ring girl.
Ring girl, that's what it's called. Yeah, see, I'm not in the vernacular of the space, but I'd love for you to just give people some little breadcrumbs about your journey so that they can get an idea of really how immense your healing and your self-development has been, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, I think I'll answer the second question before the first because it really goes into the podcast and even the name of the podcast. So I grew up in a very violent home that had a lot of drug use and alcoholism. I have memories of being 3 years old and walking out of the room and seeing my dad and multiple men just like laying in their vomit with drugs all around them and just not feeling safe. Like the energy, I've always been so sensitive to energy. So to be a little girl and to walk into a room of that type of energy, also, I think because I'd already been so abused, there was already a rip in my aura. So I was already psychic at a very young age. I could see spirits and I could talk to a grandmother that had passed. And the nice thing is, although I came from a religious upbringing, even though it was violent, because that doesn't mean religious doesn't mean peaceful necessarily. I was never discredited in those psychic gifts or tools because the things that I would say about the grandmother that had passed away, they were like, well, how could she know that? And so I was actually validated at a very young age in those gifts. And I believe that we're all born psychic. We're all born able to see and hear these things, but we're told it's our imagination or we're playing make-believe or whatever. So we discredit it and then we kind of turn it off. It was never turned off for me. Also, I came from a church that was like, really preached damnation and like if you lust, you're gonna have 7 demons tormenting you. Like it was a really hardcore belief system. And so that also made me really believe in the spirit world and anything that I would see, I would believe, at the time it was a little bit skewed because it was like dark or light for me. But so anyhow, being so open to energy and being able to see energy, growing up in a space like that was really scary for me. And there was a lot of abuse between my parents that I would watch and a lot of sexual abuse as well. And so in watching that and then in experiencing that transgression against my body from family members, there was just so much shame. I think I had taken on a lot of shame of my parents early on, but then when I was transgressed, there was not only the sexual shame. When I would be beaten by a parent, they would also say things like, you're never going to amount to anything. Like they would say really, and I know that, I send so many blessings to them because they were doing the best that they could from where they came from. They both have really traumatizing stories and they didn't have the tools that we have now to heal, but they would project their pain onto me. And even when I was sexually abused, the first parent that found out, like actually told me that I probably liked it. That was how they responded. And if you've read, if you've read The Body Keeps the Score, the deciding factor from what the book says, and it's an incredible book, it's life-changing, the deciding factor from when a woman experiences sexual trauma, The deciding factor that either leads to complex PTSD or doesn't is how her parent responds. If they respond with, "This was not your fault. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that you weren't protected." And it's a thing of instant healing and validation in the pain. It actually isn't. Like, I know someone who was raped by her stepfather over and over. And when the mother found out, she put him in jail and she put her in therapy and she consoled her. And that woman, although it was traumatic, she didn't develop complex PTSD. And I would say hers would have been a lot more traumatic than mine. With mine, because I was told that I enjoyed it and like really gruesome details, not only did I decide that I would never open up to that parent again, but I decided that I would never open up like my body to like I didn't have the language to know that that's what I was saying, but I could feel it. And typically people with sexual trauma go one of two routes. They either get really promiscuous or they get pretty prude and like shut down and they don't open up sexually in those ways. I went that direction, which is actually I'm pretty thankful for, because I ended up leaving home at 14 and I was living on the streets. I was sleeping on benches, living in a car, living in drug homes. I never had sex with any of those people because my sexuality was so suppressed. Well, other friends of mine at 14, 15 years old were having sex with different men every week. And so, which is just a different trauma response. And I'm not saying that being sexually expressed is always a trauma response, but at such a young age when you don't know your body well enough to give it away. So I was in this place of shame in my sexuality and in my worth, and was on the streets for about 2 years. And then it was about a week before my 16th birthday, I remember being at a friend's house. And as a teenager, I used to have these really not so odd coping mechanisms when I would fall into my depression. I would either get in the laundry basket, or I'd get like in a dry bathtub, or I'd get under a bed. There were like these weird things that would make me feel safe. However, when my parents would beat each other when I was a kid, that tended to be where I would hide. So it makes sense, you know? So it was right before my 16th birthday. And I remember getting under my friend's bed and I was just weeping. And I had dropped out of school already. I was working 2 jobs. I was a waitress during the day, a newspaper girl at night. And so I was telling myself, like, who do I have to love and to love me? And I'm basically just become my parents already. And I just, depression is basically a lack of hope in the future. And I had no hope for my future. What was there to hope for? And so I was weeping and just kind of like I was in this place of not wanting to live. And I had already started committing suicide at 10, but the last time I had tried to commit suicide, I was 15. I didn't know, but I drank a bottle of hydrogen peroxide thinking it would kill me. And it ended up, I just was rushed to the hospital. I had my stomach pumped and people just kind of made fun of me about it. And so there was also this feeling under that bed of like, well, if I try again and I just make a fool of myself, things are only going to get worse. But I remember putting my hand on my heart and I wasn't sure what my relationship with God was, because I had experienced so much pain that the thought of God didn't really make sense to me yet. However, I knew at such an early age that there was a higher power that made me feel safe. There was a time that my birth dad kidnapped me, and I always had this strong reverence for Jesus as well. Even though I didn't understand him, the things they said about him in church didn't feel good to me. His spirit I felt really connected to it. So at the time that my father had kidnapped me when I was like 3 or 4, I sang Jesus Loves Me over and over and over in that back seat, because I knew there's some spirit bigger than me or within me that's also around me that tends to keep me safe somehow. And I used to think that he could make me invisible also. It was really interesting, all these things that I felt with the spirit. So I sang that over and over. And sure enough, my birth dad got so upset that he took me back to the gas station and dropped me off, because and maybe he was on drugs. I don't know, like who knows what experience that was for him. But
did he leave you at the gas station?
Yeah, he did. He
by
left.
yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
At 3 years old?
I mean, there was another time I'll bring this up just because of what what awareness it's brought for me in my relationships. My other parent, and again, bless them both. They're both, I love them so much now, and they're not the same people. But another time when I was only 3 or 4, my mom dropped me off in a field because I was in the car crying. I have 2 kids. When they're crying, like there's really not much you can do. When they're in that zone, you gotta kind of just have to breathe through it. At times you can try to help them regulate, but there's times when they're unregulated and they just need to cry. You just gotta let them cry. So I was crying, and my mom's nervous system was not ever regulated. So for this 3, 4-year-old to be throwing a fit was very, probably overstimulating for her, and she didn't have the tools. And so she said, if you don't stop crying, I'm going to leave you in that field. And I didn't stop crying. And so she left me there. And I think I cried until I passed out because I remember being in that field and thinking, my mom's never coming back for me. A bad guy's going to find me. I kept thinking like a bad guy's going to find me. I'm going to die. Well, fast forward to, I just want to bring that up real quick because our childhood wounds, that inner child was still very alive for me in all of my relationships until I went back and did internal family systems or imago work to help heal that inner child, because time isn't linear. So when I heal her, she is, the inner child within me has a new narrative. But up until I did that work, every time my abandonment wound was triggered by a man, whether he wasn't answering my text, whether we were fighting and he chose to leave just to get space, I became that little girl in the field that thought she was going to die. And so I don't remember my feelings at the gas station. I just remember relief of like, I'm out of his car. Like I remember feeling like, oh, it's because I sang Jesus Loves Me. So
who found you there?
I don't remember anything.
Wow.
I don't remember anything after that. And as you probably know, with trauma, we black out a lot of it.
Yes.
So being under that bed right before I turned 16, I remember feeling like the only way that things are going to get better is if somehow like a higher power hears me. And so I like put my hand on my heart and I said, please, if you'll take this depression from me, I promise to serve you with my life. I will go help heal other people that are feeling this. Like I promise to dedicate my life to this. And I remember like a vacuum, like sucking it out. It literally felt like in a medicine ceremony where you feel a purge. It felt like a purge. And I was in Dallas. I had Greyhounded there from San Antonio and partly hitchhiked. And when I felt that vacuum come out, and I felt for the first time in a long time, like warmth of hope in my heart, it was like, okay, I know what I need to do. I have to dedicate my life to helping others that are going through this. And so I then Greyhounded it back to San Antonio. I enrolled in the Youth Homeless Association. I started going to this youth group that I had visited prior when I was like 12. And that was really the only way that I knew to dedicate my life to it, was to like go to this church and like get involved in like helping other youth. And so I got really involved in them and ended up being adopted by the assistant youth pastor there, who took me off the street. So I'm extremely thankful. But from that to now you have to be this, and this to be worthy of God's love, to be worthy of what you experienced. And to keep that, you have to fit this mold. And it was extremely dogmatic and really harmful. And also really shameful. It was shame-based. They kind of like, and they don't really, a lot of churches, I don't think, know that they're doing it. They're coming from this is what they're experiencing. So this is what they know God to be. But there is a lot of shame and fear as the foundation of why we serve God, basically. And at around 17, they basically said, this man, and I knew this man, I went to high school with him. This man is the man God has for you. And, in 7 months, we'll go all on a first date together. In a month, you can hold hands. You can see each other in public settings once a week. And then you can kiss at your wedding altar in about a year and a half. Like they pretty much laid this out.
Wow.
Yeah. And, at the time, it can sound like a cult that did an arranged marriage. I could have said no, but I probably would have been seen as someone who's refusing God's authority and not on the Christian path to heaven, basically. And I would have been like removed from leadership. Also, this guy was a hot, like pro BMXer architect that like, he was gold to me. Like,
Yeah.
sure, like
Yeah.
he seemed amazing. And so I did that. I did the path and we had our first date in front of them, saw each other once a week, but by the time we got married, we didn't know each other. And
Mhm.
we had purged ourselves of any sexual desires. And so there was no intimacy either.
Right.
So that was basically that whole journey that I just took you through. Like the root of a lot of the pain was shame and sexual suppression.
Yes.
Around 22 is when I left that and left the marriage. I left the group and pretty much plunged myself into, I knew I wanted to get out of San Antonio. So I became a cheerleader on Friday Night Lights. I can't remember how I even came by that.
Hmm.
I knew I wanted to work with the children in Uganda. I had this like strong urge to be around the African people and work with them. And it was like this big, like bubble popping when I found out about the war on children in Uganda. Cause it was like, oh shit, like I haven't gone through that much at all. Like this is awful. And also the fact that the church wasn't doing anything about it. I was like, this isn't Christianity. This isn't God's work. I want to go do that. And so, again, didn't really know what to do. So just like when I ran to the church because I wanted to help heal people, I ran into being a model and actress thinking, well, that's the platform I'll use to help the children in Uganda. And so I dove into that. But because I had this sexual suppression and shame, I kind of went through a stage of rebellion where, and not saying that people who model for Playboy it's different for everybody. Mine was from a place of rebellion. So I like went and lived in the Playboy mansion. I shot with Playboy a dozen times and was very much what people would maybe call an exhibitionist. But for me, I feel now that I'm still very much in that, but without shame. And it's also like I'm an exhibitionist of love, and it's like hand
I
in hand for
love
me.
that.
Yeah, you were gonna say something, so.
I wanna know what that was like, just that pocket. Like, that's something most people have not experienced and can't even
The Playboy?
fathom what living in the Playboy Mansion is like, the energy of it and the experience.
Probably what you would think. It's very lonely.
Mhm.
I couldn't sleep there because, again, I can see spirits and I'm very sensitive to energy. And there was so much, I don't like to use the word darkness because,
It's a label. Yeah.
yeah. But there was so much, what's the word that I'm looking for? Not just low vibration, but
Like
like,
heaviness or,
yeah,
like, isolation.
yeah. There's a certain word that's not coming to me, but I could feel it. And then also,
Density.
yeah, when someone's controlled,
Mm.
which is
Mhm.
what I came from in the church,
Mhm.
basically. But
Mhm.
that energy was so thick there. And um, I knew very quickly this was not my long-term path. I did have a contract with them for a couple of years, but I knew very quickly I was not going to live long-term in the mansion. And that was not the crowd for me. And it was very, it's interesting because you have everything you need there. If you want lobster at 2 a.m., you call the chef and he brings you lobster.
Wow.
If you want cake at 9 a.m., and the staff was so lovely. Like I loved the
Mm.
staff so much. And because I was scared in my room a lot, because I could feel and sense spirits, I would go hang out in the kitchen with the staff and we would like watch Dave Chappelle. So I developed like a really close relationship
Mm.
with them and really loved them. But often I was like alone, and even again, we had the gym, like we had everything we needed was on site. You didn't have to leave.
Mhm.
But I felt really almost like fearful. there was like this fearful spirit that I felt like I had, and just lonely. I felt really lonely, and I really felt misunderstood.
Yeah.
And when you're feeling misunderstood or out of place, oh my God, like it's so damaging for a woman, like the thing that's most healing about love and sisterhood is feeling seen and understood, and so there's such a lack of that there. And so I got out of there pretty quickly. Um, and but that was my rebellion stage, was like in my 20s. And then around 27 is when I started to really find out about imago work and inner child, internal family systems.
Mhm.
And
I'm not familiar with imago. I know about
oh,
IFS, but
so imago is one of the main things I lead people through in the beginning of working with me. It's basically, um, it's Harville Hendrix is who came up with it, but it's basically figuring out why you're attracted to who you're attracted to based off of your parents, because we're basically looking for home in someone. And that is, unless we've reframed and healed it, that's what our home
right.
is subconsciously,
Right.
unconsciously. And also what your triggers are in conflict, because what your needs, the needs that were not met when you were a child, when those needs are not met in your partnership, that's when all of our wounds open up and we tend to act out the same way we acted out as a child when our needs weren't met. So it's
Yes.
basically like getting on paper, this is what affected me most about my parents. This
Mm.
is what I'm drawn to now.
Mhm.
These are the needs that weren't met. And there's like
Mhm.
this whole, it's like a 90-minute practice. These are the needs that were not met. This is how I acted out then. And then you kind of like can see how, wow, this has played out in my adult relationships.
Right.
Um,
Is there a particular resource if someone's listening that's like, "Well, I need to canvas myself and do these questions?"
well, you can find an imago-based therapist. Those are like, there's actual, just like there's Stan Tatkin therapists, there are actual imago-based therapists that are really
Perfect.
good. I really like Dr. Wexler out of
Okay.
California. But Mary Margrave, who I think you've seen as
Yeah.
well, she's not a therapist, she's an intuitive,
Mhm.
but really familiar with imago work. And because she's an
Mhm.
intuitive, without you even speaking about your childhood, she can pick up on what your
Yes.
imago is and work with you on that. So that's something I'm really passionate about, imago
Mm.
work, because once, as you know, once you're aware of something, that's when the shift happens. It's when we bring
Yes.
it into awareness. So that work is
Yes.
really powerful.
Yes.
Yeah. So
So the rebellion and
mhm.
then moving into
Yeah, and I can say that the major shift for me was when I found a mentor. Um, I don't think he would have called himself my mentor. He felt like I was his sister or his best friend, but for me, he was a mentor. And he wrote and directed Liar, Liar, Ace Ventura, Nutty Professor. So it's funny because as a kid, I would rewatch those movies, not only for a
Hmm.
sense of predictability, because I had such anxiety as a kid, but because I needed the comedic relief. And so
Yes.
he was actually changing my life far before I ever met him,
Wow.
which is really beautiful and kind of like a cosmic giggle.
Yes.
Um, so that was really the turning point for me, because he was also the first man that ever loved me without agenda. The first man that ever reflected back to
Hmm.
me my beauty without any like need for something, to gain back.
Can I ask you a question
Mhm.
about this? Did you immediately trust that from him, or did you have a lot of distrust around receiving the authenticity of that after a lifetime full of people complimenting your beauty in a way that maybe was manipulative?
Mhm. So I'll say that he wasn't the first man who offered this.
Uh-huh.
He was the first man, though, that I trusted. And I think that it's because there's a couple of reasons why I think that happened. First, I was fresh out of a heartbreak. And as you know, with heartbreak, your heart breaks and you're open. And so I was
Yes.
really open to
Yeah.
receive because I was just in so much grief.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then I strongly believe, and, for people who don't believe in past lives, it can be seen as a metaphor. It's all happening right now, anyways. I strongly believe that we have some sort of history, that there was a knowing when I saw him.
Mhm.
There was a knowing like, oh, we've done this before.
Yes.
I know you.
Yes.
and you know me. And there was that familiarity there that was different than the imago, where it's like, oh, you're an alcoholic? So's my dad. Like, this feels like home. It was different than that. And for anyone that isn't familiar with Tom Shadyac, if you watch I Am on Netflix, you'll get a taste of that. But what's interesting is I used to go see him teach at Pepperdine, and he used to teach something called Film Related to Life. And I went through the gate one time and I forgot my pass. So I told the gatekeeper, like, I'm here for Tom Shadyac. And he was like, Tom's my best friend. And he was like, oh, I love him so much. Like, he's changed my life. And I was like, oh, that's so amazing. And then I told Tom, and he was like, he's like, oh, I've never seen him outside of the gatekeeper for a few minutes at a time. And it touched my heart so much that what he gave, like, basically everyone was calling my best friend their best friend, because that was how he lived. He lived in a way that everyone, even for a few minutes at a gate, felt so seen and so like loved by him, that they were experiencing, you know what I mean? It was like the most healing force on the planet. And I've never sat with him at a restaurant or ordered fish at Whole Foods without him looking in the person's eyes and like genuine, like asking their name, asking how their day is, telling them something that he loves about them in that encounter, you know? And I remember, like, that was the first time I ever experienced that from someone. Like, we'd walk down the street, he'd see like a worker carrying trash bags. He'd run and go take one from them, you know? He's just constantly in this place of love, love, love. And so I think seeing that, it was like, you couldn't be around this energy and doubt it. And so there was this part of like, I was open to it and I trusted it because it was like, he embodied this. And I think that I was thinking about the other day, most of my problems in relationship with trust issues is because I didn't trust the person's integrity. And I've thought about like, oh, it's interesting. One of my friends did something and he was like, wow, the way you responded was really healing for me. But then when my partner did it, completely different response. Like, why am I different in partnership? And it's because I trusted that person's integrity and I didn't trust my partners, you know? So the thing that was different about Shadyac from anyone else is there was this firm trust in his integrity. And that changed my life from that point forward. And then also Kyle Kingsbury also like was a very similar, not the same relationship or same type of like energy between us, but he introduced me to plant medicine. And that, oh my God, like for the amount of trauma that I had, I don't know that therapy alone would have been able to heal it. And I'm not saying that that's the case for everybody, but for me, there were places in plant medicine that were touched that it would have taken decades in therapy. So through those, having a mentor and working with plant medicine, which now I'm able to reach those places sober. Through that, I started to break free of the shame and come from a place of liberation instead. And once I was able to reach that place of liberation and self-love, my sexuality started to slowly emerge. And I started to get those cravings and I started to feel like actually in my body. And I'll stop here just in case you have anything, because I know I've said a lot. And then the last thing I'll say is that that's one of the reasons why I chose Untamed and Unashamed, is because I knew that the name that we choose for things like podcasts or our book or our website, whatever it is, our business, it's kind of like an initiation. Like you're being initiated into living that name that you're basically branding yourself with. And I knew, like, I chose a couple different names and I was like, I like went through the meanings behind them. And I was like, that's not really what I'm wanting to step into. And then when I chose Untamed and Unashamed, I think it was only about a year ago, there was something that shifted. And I had already done a lot of work around shame. And one of my most profound experiences around my sexual healing and my shame was doing an MDMA ceremony with Gotzi, where I had thought for a long time that my birth dad had forced me to give him blowjobs. Like for a long time, I'd thought this. And then I realized through that ceremony that he would beat my mom, and then they would have sexual encounters. But because my nervous system was still so commingled with her and I was watching this, it felt like it was happening to me. And there's a lot of healing that took place in that. And then throughout the year, working with Layla Martin and Mama Gina and, all work around pleasure, was right around the time that I was starting the new podcast. And when I chose Untamed and Unashamed, it felt like some sort of like up leveling or upgrading or an energetic shift to where something like fell away. I like physically and energetically felt like a layer fall off. And people have always complimented me on my transparency and my vulnerability. Not all, because for some it's something they don't like. It's a big button pusher or mirror, but for the most part, people have complimented it. And that was something that I wasn't sure I loved about myself for sure. I love transparency, and another melts my heart. So that was something for sure. But the vulnerability, I felt like at times was too much for people.
Yeah.
But when I chose that name, Untamed and Unashamed, for the podcast, I truly felt like something fall away. And it was like all of that vulnerability and transparency that people had seen in me, it like went up another level. And I'm still finding a way to articulate it, but I feel really strongly. And I'm not sure if you can say the same about choosing the thought room, if it was something that really took you into an upward spiral of the conscious mind or something. But
yeah, first of all, thank you. Wow, my whole body feels alive with energy after hearing just what you've walked through. I'm truly in awe. I had moments of shedding a tear here and there listening to you and feeling the potency of those moments, especially where you wanted to end your life. I was able to hook into those moments so easily in the mirroring of my own story. And those moments, curled up in a ball, praying for it all to end, like would do anything for it to stop. And those are powerful choice moments. And I'm so honored to sit across from you and to hear your story. Thank you.
Yeah.
The thought room was actually something I had written in my integration journal after my first set of ayahuasca ceremonies, because I had an experience of actually seeing my own thoughts externalized in this kind of nebulous, infinite space. And it was like a dark, a nothing space. And then I would have a thought, and then I would watch the thought kind of fractalize and have a form. So the form was either organized and beautiful or kind of chaotic and dense based on whatever, if it was a high frequency thought or a low frequency thought. So I think the first thought was, wow, this experience is so amazing that I'm in. I can't believe I'm seeing what I'm seeing. And it was pulsing and bright and rainbow and prismatic and wrapping me in this warmth. And then the second thought was, oh, I really wish I had someone to share this with. I feel so alone. And the thought went and got really tight, like a shoe that didn't fit, and I couldn't breathe. And I was like, all the color drained out of it. I was like, oh, this is a horrible experience. And then I realized I was doing it. Like, that sounds obvious.
Your thought,
But there was enough separation from it as I was watching it as an observer play out in this infinite sandbox, where I realized I was both participating and consciously could control it. So I selected a different thought, which is, I actually really love spending time with myself. And it expanded again. It got bright and warm and beautiful. And I thought, holy shit, I just figured out the key to life. Like, this is it. If I can become conscious, if I can create more mental hygiene, if I can be, watching from this place of the observer, consciously selecting the thoughts that I want to have out in the world, this will align quite literally the frequency, the vibration of the quantum field to draw those experiences, to magnetize the feelings that I want to perpetuate to me. So in my journal, I had simply written, remember the thought rooms. And then it was in a later ceremony where I got stuck in a loop that was quite simply podcast, the word podcast. And then it was big work, more medicine, podcast, big work, more medicine, podcast. And I was just like, okay, got it. Let's move on. It was like, don't forget, big work, more medicine, podcast. I was like, no way am I drinking more medicine. Like this, I can't even walk right now.
Yeah.
And it was just like time, big work, more medicine, podcast. And I do believe that sometimes when we get in those loops in the medicine and it doesn't want us to be able to escape, it's because we're being neurally reprogrammed.
Yeah.
And we need that repeated on a loop in order for it to entrain inside of us very deeply, so that I didn't walk out of that ceremony and say that was just my ego telling me to start a podcast, because I had that resistance. And thankfully I listened to that impulse. Here we are. And when I was looking for a name, I just flipped back through my notes and I went, the thought room.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in the beginning of the year, I did a mushroom ceremony with my sister's group, and I think I took 3.5 grams of penis envy. In my entire life.
Which is a strain of mushrooms, in case anyone doesn't know.
Thanks for that clarification. I just assume everyone knows.
I just want to protect you with that one.
3 grams of penis envy. It was by far the most bliss-filled night of my entire life. Like, not only because it was with my sisters, where we took the medicine and then we all took turns. There's only 4 of us, laying on a pad like this by the fire, and they just sang blessings over us and prayed over us. And holy hell, oh my God, like that was one of the most profound, most healing experiences of my life. Because also I could feel so much joy of, wow, we've been doing this for a long time and we've been burned for this and we're doing this and we're here and we're free to do it. And like, look at all the work we've done. Like, look at where we're at. And there's like that too. But I brought that up because in the beginning of the night, which this happens in all of my medicine journeys, feels a little dark in the beginning. And I'm like moving through a little bit of fear. And when I was in that mode, I was looking at the trees and they looked super fucking scary. Like I could see their DNA, but it was like they were going to suck me in a dark way. And then I remember looking at my labradorite crystal and seeing my son's face in it, but he was screaming at me. So then later, after moving through all that and experiencing all this bliss, and we like bathed in all this money, like just did all these amazing things with the spirit of money. Yeah, one of my sisters brought 10,000 in cash.
Yeah,
and we just like spoke to the spirit of money and like just called it in and promised to be good stewards. Rolled around in it naked. It was wonderful.
Ooh, I love that.
But by the end of the night, looking back at the trees from that place, oh my God, the DNA was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I wanted it to suck me in. And then looking at the labradorite, my son looked so happy. And it was like, oh, they're mirroring back my state.
Yes.
Like they're like my son at home. If he's acting like that, he's likely like mirroring back what I'm, what I mean? My energetic state.
Yes.
So the children mimic what they see.
Yes.
So I love that story about the thought room. And I know Joe Dispenza, this is basically his work, but I just wish that everyone knew the power of their thoughts.
Yes.
Yeah. And then, a big part of the sexual liberation that came from the sexual healing and all of that work, one of the main things that has been really powerful for me in bringing me back in my body and in bringing me into a place also of confidence in my vulnerability. And because just because you're vulnerable and transparent doesn't mean you're confident, but to be confident in it has a different energy to it. People can be very, come at that with a very like insecure, like unworthy energy, or come at it with that queen-like confident, posture with it. But with that, and then also with my worth and just standing in my power, I'd say that like in the last year, one of the number one tools has been pleasure, has been my orgasm, has been using my blood, because as a kid, all of that was shameful. My period was so painful. It was so heavy. Of course it was painful because I had so much trauma in my womb, but also it was heavy. And so I would bleed through my pants. I'd get made fun of at school. There was all this like shame around my period, but also like dreading of my period. And then around pleasure, it was like, first of all, I didn't feel worthy of pleasure. Secondly, it was a very confusing concept for me because when I was molested, I was told I enjoyed it. And so, which if you read the book, Come As You Are, it'll explain how sometimes when you enjoy it, it doesn't mean that you were actually it'll explain the science of your body, of how sometimes in sexual trauma, things that can happen where you're like, oh, fuck, did I enjoy that? And kind of like what happens in the body that can cause that confusion. But so I'll recommend that if anyone has questions around that. But this last year has been a really big reclamation of my pleasure and of my orgasm and of the magic of my blood. And every day, I'd say almost every day, I start the day with typically like 3 orgasms. And sometimes
not bad, Jade.
Yeah.
Not bad at all.
Sometimes my body wants more and it's like, let's
typically
go
3.
Well, under 3 is like, well, like, come on.
What are you even
We're
doing?
here. Yeah. But sometimes my body's like, hey, we're already here. Like, let's go for 10. And then sometimes my body actually doesn't want any. My body just wants to feel the pleasure and to feel that I'm servicing it and like being slow with her and giving her what she needs, but doesn't actually want to orgasm. And me not forcing that on her and not like using that as the end goal of the practice as well. And just being with whatever comes up in the pleasure practice, like that alone has been really healing. Because with a lot of partners, not only do they tend to penetrate us before opening us,
yes,
but if they are, not all, not conscious partners for the most part, some just don't know yet. But a lot of times, even when partners they do want us to orgasm, sometimes it's for their ego and not for us.
Yes.
And so
and we can feel that, by the way.
Yeah. And so for us to like really be with our bodies and to pleasure ourselves and to just sit with what comes up and sit with what's desired in that moment can be so, so healing. And when you can come to that place within yourself and you embody that, you won't allow anything else in your partnership and in your sex. And it also, there is something that for me, I've had to move through of like, man, this is so amazing. And the sex magic that I also like involve myself in through that. And the way that I feel that I access God in each orgasm, which is the opposite of what I was taught. I was taught that my sexuality separated me from God, and to now merge my sexuality and my spirituality and to bring both of those to their highest function and to feel truly like I'm on plant medicine at times. And like, for all of that, there's something I had to move through where I was like, oh, this feels too big for another human. Like, this is a big, like, can someone else meet this type of need, you know? So it really raises your standards, which can feel scary. And even though that may make the dating pool smaller, like imagine though the depth, you know? So there's that. And the last thing I'll add to that pleasure is I use a cervical wand, which brings cervical orgasms and full body orgasms. I speak my intentions into it. I'll charge it.
That's cool.
Yeah, I'll charge it under the moon. I'll speak my intentions into it. I lay it on my altar. Like this morning, I asked for a really potent conversation with you that brought healing and connection with you and brought healing for the listeners. I asked for more money to fall effortlessly into my lap with ease. I asked for more understanding in my current partnership. I spoke all that into my wand and then I put it in. Typically, like you want to make sure before putting anything in your pussy that like it wants it, like almost to the point where it's like going to suck it in. I've gotten to the point where like it's always ready to suck something in because it's a daily practice of mine, which sounds probably overstimulating. But when your sexuality is at that place, man, like not only has my money doubled, but the magnetism of that, like it's something so incredible. Like you have to experience it to really grasp it. But so I wait, you want to wait till she's ready. Or if you're ready, you stick the wand in and then with that intention and the wand, I breathe it up my chakras. And then when I hit the seventh chakra is typically when I will climax and feel that intention. Like I'll visualize it, with like a five senses of like thinking what it smells like, what it feels like. And also what's the desire under the intention? Why do I want the money? Oh, okay. I want to feel that I have the power to provide for my children.
Yeah.
I want to feel, which is power.
Freedom.
Right.
Power.
And so then I'll feel all of that. And then I'll bring it back down. And I'll do that a couple of times. But when I take my wand out, and this is something that like for some people feels like too much. I love it.
I love too much.
Okay, good.
Let's go there.
So typically not typically, every time that I take my wand out, instead of wiping it off or wiping myself off, I take the juice and I put it on my perfume spots.
Ooh.
Yeah. And to me, it's like, I mean, first of all, if you really look back at the history, like they used to use that for anointing.
Yeah.
And
it's the pheromones.
And women would like use it to attract men. Like they would put it in their food and things like that, as well as their blood. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's a way that I've really reclaimed, like stepped out of shame of like, I am so unashamed that I'll wear my pussy juice as my perfume. Yeah. And then my blood.
Hashtag.
Yeah. Pussy perfume.
We're going to start it.
I think also something that you do, that I've heard you speak on it a little bit. I'll wear my period blood as a mask while I speak my intentions, and I'll put it on my drum and I'll drum. I'll, use it in my plants. All types of things that I do with that. That's also a reclamation of stepping out of that shame. And so, I mean, that alone has been one of the biggest tools in the last year when it comes to becoming unashamed. And also, if you're in your pleasure, if you're orgasming every day, first of all, it releases chemicals.
Yes.
4 chemicals. Without those chemicals, the body actually, like, you can be ill. Like it's so important to have those chemicals released in a woman's body. So there's that's so healing, but also when you just had an orgasm, you operate differently. Yeah. I'm more creative after an orgasm. I'm more confident. Like no one that just had an orgasm doesn't feel like a queen, doesn't feel like confident in who she is. And so it's a big ego destroyer too. Yeah. Like you're not hearing that you're not good enough after an orgasm. You're like ready to take on the world and write and dance or whatever your expression is. Yes. And I mean, it's a completely different day when I start my day that way.
I have questions about the difference for men and women in this, because I know for men, and like there's a video by Sadhguru about semen retention and the spiritual importance of a man learning to wield his sexual energy and decide when he wants to orgasm or not orgasm. And then we're talking about how for women it can be really super recharging. And what just in my own exploration with men, I've found in my deeper partnerships that retention is actually more recharging for the male.
Yeah.
So sorry, men, if you're hearing this, but I think
doesn't mean that they can't orgasm though. And the thing is they can actually have multiple orgasms by not ejaculating, right? Because they're going to be edging. They're going to get to that point, and it's something that they probably need to train on their own. Right. Same with a woman. Like I firmly believe that to become a master at your sexuality, you have to do that on your own first.
Yes.
And that's one thing also about sexual development for men and women. You can do all the imago work, all the inner child work, all the plant medicine ceremonies, and it may not translate to your confidence in the bedroom. And it may not translate to how you can even move your body in the bedroom. You'll still feel rigid. Yes. When you, though, really work on your sexual development, this is why I'm like so passionate about being a sex coach. When it's your sexuality that you're working on, what's so interesting is that translates out to everything else. Because if you can set boundaries in the bedroom, and if you can own your power in the bedroom and stand in your worth in the bedroom and be expressive in the bedroom, sure as heck you're going to do it everywhere else. Because that's the most vulnerable place. You're naked. Yes. You're in front of someone. Yes. So with that though, with men, I don't know the science behind it, but my intuition is that not only does this also make men better lovers, but I feel that men, and this is what I just feel from spirit, is that, especially because it's their life force, that men probably should be orgasming every day, but ejaculating once a week, maybe once a month. It depends on their own. If you're ill, not even once a week. You want to preserve that life force.
Exactly.
So you really have to try out what feels best for you once a week, once a month, like every other week. But it doesn't mean that you can't orgasm. Like I think that if you can do sex magic with your partner, or you're having casual sex with your partner, which I mean, I don't really know what else to call it, but and you're getting to a point of orgasm, there is something you can push like in between the balls, or right where the ball, like I have to think of what the actual name is, but it's
like
at
the perineum.
Yeah. Okay, that's it.
So I know what's going on, Jade.
So I've pushed that.
I've pushed that button before.
So if you push that button, it should keep you from ejaculating. So try this before doing it with a woman, of course, but
there's actually a lot of different things that can help. And I'd love to we can popcorn because I think I'm just doing a time check here, but we could popcorn some of our favorite sexual healing resources for both men and women. But one resource for men wanting to learn how to orgasm without necessarily ejaculating is the multi-orgasmic man. And there's a ton of different ways in
there's
there.
There's also more multi-orgasmic couple.
Yes. And multi-orgasmic woman.
Yeah.
So those are some, if you want to just name some here. I also love Urban Tantra. I've plugged this book like every single time I talk about this one. That's from Barbara Carrellis. As far as women's healing, I like one called Aphrodite's Daughters.
Ooh, I haven't heard that.
It's really good for sexual trauma. Stories of women healing sexual trauma. And then another one called Womb Wisdom. I can't remember the authors at the moment. We'll put this all in the show notes, but it's got kind of like a spiral, a red and yellow spiral shell on the front.
That's so interesting because on my drum, every month that I bleed, I do a red spiral in my blood. And I didn't know that. Today on my podcast, Maria Stark aired on Womb Wisdom.
Oh, I did her sound training with
really?
Elijah Ray. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Very cool.
I instead of books, maybe I'll also talk about people you can follow or work with since you did the books. For men, I'd say Justin Patrick Pierce. He's amazing. His wife wrote The Awakened Woman's Guide to Everlasting Love, which is so good. So Justin Patrick Pierce, and then I think most people are probably familiar with David Data, but I also love Jamie Wheel. Yeah, so those are some core.
Who wrote Come As You Are?
You know, I don't love Come As You Are.
Yep.
But if you're looking for the science of it and the history of it, it's a good book. I love Pussy by Mama Gina.
Yeah, I've read that.
It's got both.
I went to one of her workshops.
Oh, really?
Forever ago.
I had her on my podcast about a month ago.
Amazing.
It was really, really cool.
Sweet.
Yeah. So there's, I would say Pussy would be a good book, but as far as women to follow for sex magic, Layla Martin is my teacher, and I mean, she's changed my life. I'm so thankful to be in her transmission field. And there's also Tantric Alchemy, which really is great. But Layla Martin is like breaks the mold. Like,
well, there you go, folks.
Yeah,
there you go.
And then I also teach in my sessions with people. Not only do I teach the imago work, but I work a lot around sexual trauma. But also through working through the sexual trauma, it's a lot of rewriting your sexual narrative during sex magic with yourself. So something that I lead people through is, or something, you know, we can even invite the listeners to do now if they're open to it and feel safe, is they can record just on their phones or their laptops an audio message of what their inner child would need to have heard about their sexuality, or what their 13-year-old that was just transgressed upon, what she needed to hear.
Yes.
Right after this happened. And then what you do is you want it to be about 9 minutes. And the whole thing doesn't have to be just about that. You can work your way up. Um, and if I were to do a session with someone, I would kind of help make it the 9 minutes. But you can say everything else that you need to say around worth or whatever it is to try to stretch it out. And then what you'll do is you'll really go there to that moment of impact or to that inner child. You'll go to a painful memory and you'll really feel the anger or the grief or whatever comes up for you in that moment. And then you'll turn that on. You'll listen to your own voice
Mm.
while you'll pleasure yourself and
Yes.
do the sex magic. And basically, what you're telling your brain and what you're rewiring is a new neural network of, oh, okay, I can feel this pain and this grief and connect it to my pleasure.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
also, that pain and grief didn't steal my pleasure, it
Yes.
didn't steal my power.
Yes.
And that alone is so beautiful.
Mhm.
But if we can, like, trauma healing can be orgasmic. And
Yes.
I didn't know that. And it's so interesting to, it sounds weird, but it's so interesting to go to a place of trauma and do an exercise like that and be crying
Yes.
while feeling pleasure.
Orgasming, yeah.
Yeah. But
It's
it's profound.
amazing.
It's really, really healing.
Pleasure and pain are so inextricably linked in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, and the sexual space is such a great way to heal our shadow and play with
Mhm.
it. And I love this exercise. I really hope everybody takes this invitation. It's almost like creating your own guided pleasure meditation.
Yeah. And you can work your way up. If you don't feel comfortable with that just yet, you can give yourself self an oil breast massage.
Hmm.
It would be nice if you could be looking at yourself in the mirror, making eye contact with yourself while you're listening to those words, giving yourself a breast massage because we carry a lot of trauma and pain in our breast. And when
Yes.
we do, go up one way, down another for a couple minutes and then vice versa, you're actually like, which is also right around the heart,
Hmm.
you're releasing a lot of energy there that's stored. So there's a lot of different practices you can do around that, but that's been my favorite.
I love that. And I'm going to add one more that I shared with a male friend yesterday about deepening into his self-love and his body, and I suggested that he stand in front of a full-length mirror. He was expressing that he feels awkward dancing sometimes
Mm,
and some difficulty expressing himself. And it's interesting because pragmatically anyone would look at this human being and be like they are literally a picture perfect archetype of the masculine. It's
mm.
so funny how
Was it Jason Momoa?
it's so funny how those distortions occur. So I encouraged him to stand in front of a full-length mirror naked in candlelight, turn on
Mm,
some music that made him feel sensual and sexy, and allow his body to breathe, to move, to dance. And when the insecurities came up around his body or how he looked or what have you, to take that, I called it like a sweetheart voice. And it's the way that we would speak to a child or a lover. So we're looking in the mirror and our belly looks
yeah.
bloated or our breasts look lopsided or we
Mhm,
don't like the scar on something, and we look at it, we breathe with it,
mhm,
we be with it, and we thank our body for
mhm.
all that it's fucking walked through
Yeah.
and that we're still alive
Mhm.
and how that scar got there or
God, and it can go so deep because you can say, "What emotion is here?" And
mhm.
you'll be surprised what, like, childhood memory may come up.
And to welcome those and to
Mhm,
be with that and to be able to be the adult to the child and actually go back in
mhm,
time like you were sharing and say the things that that child needed to hear with love and
mhm.
reparent ourselves. So there's so much juiciness in this
Yeah.
work here, and I could talk about this stuff with you
Yeah.
forever. And
Yeah.
so I'm really glad to be able to segue into us doing a follow-up podcast on your
Yeah.
podcast later this week.
Yeah.
So people are going to have to hop on over to yours to
Yeah.
hear the part 2 of all of this juiciness.
Yeah.
And I'm just so grateful and wanting to know in the final few minutes of this podcast if there's anything else on your heart that really really wants to be shared with this audience, and then of course letting people know where they can find you online, how they can get in touch with you about your coaching and your offerings.
Yeah. So the podcast, as we said, is called Untamed and Unashamed. And I'm at the Jade Bryce on all, well, I really only have Instagram. So on Instagram, you can reach out to me there or email me. There's a little email button on there for the offerings. Yeah, those are all the places you can find me. As far as a last offering, maybe I think that sometimes when I share this story, it can feel like so many different emotions can come up. Like, what? She starts her day with 3 orgasms. I didn't even have 3 orgasms this month because some women struggle to have orgasms.
Yeah.
And so sometimes hearing something like this can feel really triggering and discombobulating, and it can go into a downward dark spiral if you let it. So I'd say that if that's a place that you're feeling is like opening up in you, I would say to really use that as because everything is a portal when we bring intention to it. So to stop it in its tracks and bring an intention of understanding and love of maybe first of all, where did that story come from? If you're feeling, is there something that makes you feel unworthy of pleasure? But also if you feel confused as to like, this is coming up because the last time I spoke about this on a podcast, the woman afterwards was like, I can't remember the last time I had an orgasm. I really struggle with it. And I felt so much like, oh, I didn't even think about that. I didn't think about how some women are there. So if you're there, I would start with writing a letter to your pussy. That means you're not even like doing anything with your body, but writing a letter to your pussy and just seeing what comes up. Like write through whatever experiences or memories come up for you of your first. So I can just give 2 really quick examples. Like I remember the first time my mom saw me touching myself. I was like 4, and she said, "Smell your hand." And so I smelled it, and she said, "Do you want to go around? Do you want to walk around smelling like that?"
Wow.
I was like 4.
Wow.
Then when I was like 10, I remember she was beating me and I was naked because I was about to get in the shower. And when she was hitting me and I like fell back and my legs swung open, she was like, "Close your legs. You think I want to see your disgusting pussy?" And so it was like, not only was I being beaten, but my most sacred part was being devalued. And so I'd urge you that because I truly feel, and sure, there's hormones that come to play, but even then, I truly feel that when we struggle to orgasm, there's a disconnection in our body that is deeply rooted in either suppression or shame or trauma. So if you can write a letter, just conversating and see what memories come up and see what narratives you are operating there. And then you just start there. Like just start there. You don't even have to touch yourself. You can just write almost like stream of consciousness, just see what comes out. And that would be a starting point. Because I know the pain of maybe feeling like you're broken because your body is not doing that, you know?
Yeah.
Why do I go numb? Why am I all of these things. So start with a letter and then reach out to either one of us and or follow Layla's work. There's so many tools now, which is so amazing because we're in the day and age where it's not odd to seek help in this area, which is so beautiful.
Yes.
So be untamed and unashamed. And
yes.
Yeah, that'd be the last thing.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Jade. This has been very juicy.
Yeah.
Hashtag pussy perfume. And I'm so looking forward to continuing this conversation on your podcast. And I'm so blessed to get to connect with you more deeply and to really see you and your power and your beauty and your strength. I am truly humbled.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
I'm so thankful to be able to sit here and to again, sit in your transmission field of host energy and all of the beauty that you bring to that. But I'm also super excited to hear your side of the story on Wednesday about what this journey has been like for you, because I'm sure it's very magical.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. To be continued.
To be continued.